This is all theater. This is all just political theater.
Political theater. Political theater.
Pure political
theater.
Theater.
Political theater.
The nefarious,
Significant and protracted
Political theater for political theater's sake.
I yield back.
From Washington, this is Political Theater, Roll Call's review of the spectacle of politics on Capitol Hill and across the country. I'm Jason Dick.
Mr. President, I rise today to address the need to reform our military justice system. By every measure that you can imagine, we are moving in the wrong direction.
Why does something that seems pretty common sense and has wide bipartisan support get stalled in the United States Senate? A case study is the current debate over how to address military sexual assault, an issue the Pentagon and Congress has grappled with for years. Over those years, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York has built support for her legislation to overhaul the military justice system to address this. And this year, she hit a high watermark with more than 60 colleagues supporting her efforts. But the legislation doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. Why? Well, lucky for us, we've got CQ Roll Call senior editor Megan Scully, who has covered the issue for years. Megan, welcome to Political Theater.
Thanks for having me, Jason.
So let's kind of start at the beginning. Let's do the kind of quick recap of several years of fighting over this issue. This has been a problem in the military for years. It's been described as an epidemic that there are sexual assaults within the ranks at a rate far higher than we see in the general population. When did the Pentagon start realizing this is a problem, and when did Congress start to get involved?
Well, I think that the Pentagon has known it's a problem for some time. There wasn't much action on it until Congress got involved over a decade ago. And it was sort of a strange coalition involving Susan Collins and Jackie Speer in the House and Michael Turner, a House Republican, who got on board with the issue because of concerns about a constituent. It took off, really, about 8 years ago when Senator Gillibrand made it a high-profile issue. And her bill, which she has pushed for over the last 8 years now, would basically take the decision for prosecuting a crime within the military's ranks out of the hands of a military commander. Right now, the commander is the one who decides whether a felony like rape or even murder gets prosecuted. And there are those on the Hill who say that this leads to decisions that are discriminatory against both women and minorities, and that crimes go unprosecuted. So what she wants to do is she wants lawyers to actually make that decision on all crimes aside from those that are uniquely military, like going AWOL. The Pentagon has long been against this, saying that commanders need this tool to enforce good order and discipline in the ranks. And Congress has typically bought that argument over the years. Gillibrand has had a very small coalition behind her and kind of a unique one that has included folks like Ted Cruz and Rand Paul. You don't usually see them all on the same piece of legislation. But most lawmakers have been opposed to it and have said, they agree with the Pentagon that the commander should retain this authority. But as the years have gone on and instances of sexual assault within the military have gone uncurbed, just despite some sort of other measures put in place by Congress, she's grown more and more support. It's really sort of hit a crescendo in the last year or two. And as you said, her bill now has the support of over 60, I believe it's 66 right now, 67 including her, members of the Senate. That includes Mitch McConnell. It includes many Republicans, but it does not include Jack Reed, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and James Inhofe, the ranking member.
And just to kind of reiterate how weird the military justice system can be, sometimes the commander could be the one accused of a crime and deciding on whether that will be prosecuted, right? I mean, that's an extreme example, but like in some cases, though, the commanders who are ruling on some of this stuff are actually they could conceivably be, a part of the case itself.
They could be, I mean, the commander would have a commander. So, presumably he wouldn't be, or she wouldn't be deciding a case directly that they're involved in. But the commanders do kind of set the tone for those who work for them. So when there is a crime like rape or harassment or murder in their ranks, it may be in their best interest to cover it up, especially if it's particularly bad in their own ranks. So, and you also have the issue of cronyism within the military. So a woman or man, there are men in the military who are raped as well, may not want to come forward and accuse a colleague of rape or another crime because they feel like the commander is buddies with the person, with their assailant. So it is a very sort of uniquely military problem in a culture that has not seemed to improve at all, despite countless provisions and enacted by Congress and even efforts within the Pentagon to curb this. So it really comes down to, Gillibrand argues, taking this authority away from commanders.
And about, the two leaders of the Senate Armed Services Committee, I mean, what we have seen, repeatedly over the last month or so since Gillibrand hit the 60, vote or support mark, is that she'll go to the floor of the Senate. She will ask unanimous consent, because everything works on unanimous consent in the Senate, to bring up her legislation and to consider it on the floor, something that is within her rights as a senator. And then Jack Reed, the Democrat from Rhode Island who chairs the Senate Armed Services Committee and is a Democratic colleague, will object.
Mr. President, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that at a time to be determined by the Majority Leader in consultation with the Republican leader, the Senate Armed Services Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-1520 and the Senate proceed to its consideration, that there be 2 hours for debate equally divided in the usual form, and that upon the use or yielding back of that time, the Senate vote on the bill with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Reserving my right to object, Mr. President.
The senator from Rhode Island.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to first engage in a colloquy with Senator Inhofe, the ranking member of the committee, on the processes we will use to consider all the ideas and amendments I expect will be offered by committee members to address the investigation and prosecution of sexual assault and related crimes under the UCMJ in the annual defense bill.
And it has been this sort of, forgive the term, political theater, where Gillibrand, of course, she would like to get this bill on the floor, but she kind of knows that Jack Reed is lurking there and going to object. But let's talk a little bit about Reed's background, because he has a military background, and it doesn't fit neatly into the type of sort of profile you would expect for somebody to just put the kibosh on a colleague's sort of real like long fought legislative effort.
So I'll just go back real quick and say, there's a long history of Democrats on that committee opposing Gillibrand's efforts. When Carl Levin was the chairman, he strongly opposed it. So did people like Claire McCaskill. This was many years ago. But Jack Reed is a West Point grad. He is a retired military officer. And yes, he's repeatedly going to the floor. Gillibrand wants to bring this bill up as a standalone, and she's seeking unanimous request to do so. Jack Reed is smacking her down at every turn because he wants to include it in the massive National Defense Authorization Bill, which his committee will mark up mostly behind closed doors next month.
I think we all would prefer that prevention, command climate, all of these factors be such that adjudication is not necessary, because the crimes, the incidents, the difficulties, the mental and physical anguish that victims incur have been avoided because we have taken the steps to prevent these actions from taking place in our military forces.
Now, Reid does support, he has come around to supporting taking crimes, sex crimes, the decision for prosecuting sex crimes outside the chain of command. So he's on the same page as members of the Joint Chiefs and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. That is a pretty big pivot for him. What he and the Joint Chiefs and Inhofe and some others oppose is expanding that to include all non-uniquely military crimes. Now, what Gillibrand argues and her supporters is what happens if, for instance, two crimes occur. If somebody is both raped and murdered, then who decides whether it gets prosecuted? The other issue that has percolated recently is a race issue. And the fact is that that Black service members are prosecuted for crimes at more than 2 times the rate that their white colleagues are prosecuted for the same crimes. So what she's saying is, we need to level the playing field here. We need to kind of take this cronyism outside of the decision for prosecution, not just for sexual assault, but for all major crimes. And Reid opposes that.
Right. And this week, we as we're recording this podcast, we saw that Jim Inhofe, the Oklahoma Republican, who's the ranking member on the Armed Services Committee, he was sort of showing some letters that the Joint Chiefs had written, like in the middle of this debate. This is like, talk about that a little bit.
So the Joint Chiefs really, they jumped right into this as we're kind of heading into sort of the middle of legislative season, particularly for defense policy. And what they said was, we're on board. We recognize that there's a sexual assault problem within the military, and that all of these efforts have not solved the problem. So go ahead and do this sort of pared down version where we repeal military justice, or not repeal, we overhaul military justice just for these sexual crimes. But what we cannot stand by is sort of this more this broader overhaul that would include murder, that would include other issues, and they're kind of thrusting themselves right in the middle of this really hot button political debate. In the past, previous members of the Joint Chiefs have testified against Gillibrand's measure as well. So that itself is not unique, but given sort of the groundswell of support on members of both parties, and the Joint Chiefs and the Defense Secretary continuing to fight against this broader Gillibrand proposal is really something to see.
And one of the things I've just, as I've been sort of taking note and covering it too. I mean, I covered a documentary that came out a few years ago in 2012, 2013 called The Invisible War by a filmmaker named Kirby Dick. No relation to me, although he's also from Arizona, which is odd. But his film with his producer Amy Ziering was the first time that I had realized, the extent of the problem in the military ranks. And when I feel like that film, I mean, not a lot of people watch documentaries, but that film did inject into the public consciousness people's stories, because
Yes.
when you see the numbers, it's staggering. But then when you hear kind of the pain in a service member's voice when they're talking about the fact that they couldn't, as you were kind of alluding to, they didn't feel like they could go to their commanding officer because they were either friends with somebody who was the assailant or the accused, and then since then, in the intervening years, we've seen a number of particularly women in Congress, senators and House members, who have had some of their own same experience. And so, like Martha McSally, a former Republican senator from Arizona, she talked about her, when she was sexually assaulted by one of her colleagues. And then Joni Ernst, who is in the Republican leadership circle, is a Republican from Iowa, she's joined on with Gillibrand's like legislation. Do you think that this is what has brought us so as far as we have been, because people are actually sharing these stories as opposed to them being kind of tucked away in like an inspector general's report?
Yeah, I think that the whole Me Too movement has certainly brought this to light. This is a problem, as we know, throughout society, but within the military, because of the culture and because of the justice system, it is really heightened. So I think that people like Joni Ernst and Martha McSally coming out and talking about their own experiences with sexual assault certainly has helped propel this forward. I think last year, the brutal assault and murder of Vanessa Guillen at Fort Hood and the ongoing problems at Fort Hood on this issue have really added urgency to the debate. The House bill is actually named after her, and there's this concern that these crimes are so heinous and so graphic in some instances, particularly as women are finally getting more leadership roles within the military. Combat is becoming open to women. There have been advances within the military in regards to issues facing women, but are women going to get into leadership positions? Are women going to stay in the military if there is this ongoing concern about sexual assault? And I should say, once again, men also do face sexual assault within the military. That is something that is often overlooked in this debate.
Yeah, I remember just the screening of Invisible War. This is years ago now. Some of the revelations that came from male service members. Yeah. I mean, people literally gasped in the theater. And it was one of those things that just, this is a fairly specialized audience, people who go to documentaries about military sexual assault in Washington, D.C. Sometimes it's hard to shock people because, we sometimes in our corners of the world, whether we got a lot of know-it-alls. And I feel like we are approaching like another phase, it feels like. Because something's going to happen. You mentioned the defense authorization bill, Reid wanting to incorporate that. I mean, is that... It's not a particularly good look for him when he's objecting to it, but it does sound like there's going to be some kind of movement, even if it's, it's partly because he wants to keep it within the purview of his own committee.
Yeah. I mean, he can continue to object, right? He can not allow Gillibrand to bring her bill to the floor as a standalone. But the fact of the matter is that she has more than 60 senators supporting her bill. If the House goes forward with it in its version of the defense authorization bill, and over there it has bipartisan support as well from people like Mike Turner, a Republican and a senior member of the House Armed Services Committee, it's going to be hard for Reid to continue to object to this unless he persuades some of his colleagues who have signed on to Gillibrand's bill to take sort of the lesser, the more restrictive approach, or the less restrictive approach, I guess, the one that he's advocating that only addresses these sex crimes. But he can't continue objecting he most likely will not object to the bill, to the full defense authorization bill itself, whether or not it includes this language. That bill covers all kinds of policy and has been enacted 60 straight years.
Yeah, I mean that's the next sort of phase, I guess, that we'll be looking at, is just how much they'll be able to do as part of that bill, and whether that is enough to convince people that enough is being done. But it does seem like we've just reached this point where, I mean, it can no longer be ignored. I mean, and again, you mentioned that the personal stories keep coming, whether they're recent assaults. I mean, you mentioned Turner. I mean, his district includes the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and like the power of people going to their member of Congress and them saying, like, I'm going to address this. It just seems, I mean, it's been years in the making, but it seems like it's happening. Something's happening.
It certainly does. I mean, and especially when, like I said, you look at the people who support this bill, Reid and Inhofe are certainly kind of outliers here. And when you see, it's not often that you see Gillibrand and Mazie Hirono and
Chuck Grassley.
Chuck Grassley and Rand Paul and Mitch McConnell, all and Joni Ernst, as you remember, as you said, another member of Republican leadership, all on the same board, on the same page, and a lot of these people, including Joni Ernst, have come around only recently to Gillibrand's bill. That they previously opposed it, but they support it now.
Well, it's going to be a long haul. I think in covering it because it always does take more time than you think. And unfortunately for me, I don't get to do it with you anymore because you're moving on. This will probably be your last podcast as a member of the CQ Roll Call newsroom. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to say good luck in your new venture as the Congress team leader at Bloomberg. I will miss you. Congress editor. Sorry, I know that there are all these gradations, but good luck in your venture. I look forward to competing with you on covering this story. Although I don't know how great my chances are because you know more about this topic and defense policy than anybody I know. So good luck to you. And it's been great working with you, and thank you for kind of walking us through this. It's just a really important topic, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Thanks so much, Jason.